My name is Sherry Plonsky, and I'm a PhD student at SOAS. I'm also the co-chair of the SOAS Israel Society with Dimi Rader, who's sitting over there. On behalf of the SOAS Israel Society, I want to welcome you all here this evening. As this is our inaugural event this academic year, I hope you'll bear with me if I say a few words about the society before we begin the panel. The SOAS Israel Society that we have created this year is developed out of our desire to provide a space for critical scholarship and constructive discussion of Israel. We are at SOAS, and this felt like the type of Israel Society that was needed here, as a forum in which to look at the conflict and its intersection with internal and external policies, cultural, religious, and gender relations, economics, and social trends in terms of their impact on Israeli politics and society. We have no particular political stance, as our membership is inclusive of anyone interested in this arena of discussion, regardless of their background or nationality. We are currently planning a number of events that address these subjects, including a panel on gender and sexuality, one on Israel's politics on Iran, one focused on Britain's relationship with Israel, especially the legacy of the mandate, an event on Israel's economic and diplomatic relations with the Far East, and many more. We invite any of you who are SOAS students to come to our society meetings in order to further discuss these types of debates and plan our upcoming events. And the next meeting will be hopefully on February 6th, but you can check our website for updates. The event we are hosting tonight exemplifies the critical space we want to explore. We are here for a discussion of the global Palestinian-led movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, or BDS for short, that will go beyond the commonly held arguments about its legitimacy. We find focusing on this does little more than polarize the debate. Instead, we are asking our panelists to consider the efficacy of the movement and its successes and failures in achieving its goals, which are, of course, to end the occupation, establish the right of return of refugees, and ensure full equality for Palestinian citizens of Israel. And in the shorter term, to build up effective pressure on the Israeli government and compel it to act toward the above. The panel we have put together comprises a range of activists, academics, and experts with first-hand experience in the BDS movement. Our hope is to engage both panelists and audience members alike in reframing BDS in terms of its impacts and its potential to transform the dynamics of Israeli and Palestinian politics. But before moving on to the question, I want to explain a little about the format for the panel. Each of our panelists have been asked to prepare a 5-minute presentation. After everyone has spoken, I will ask them to comment on specific points that are brought up in each other's statements and to respond directly to one another. And we plan to have about 45 minutes for a question and answer period with the audience at the end of the discussion. Also, if people are live tweeting, and by all means, please do, we encourage you to use the hashtag SOASIS, S-O-A-S-I-S. Finally, I think we are really fortunate to be at SOAS, where some of today's most sensitive issues can be discussed with so many different positions represented. While we respect the fact that people feel strongly about this particular issue, we ask them to also respect our speakers and audience. Anyone persistently interrupting the panelists or deliberately disrupting the event will be asked to leave. Okay, we're ready to begin? And on to our question for this evening. In light of the long-term goals and vision of the BDS movement, we invited our panelists to discuss the campaign, 1, in terms of its success in affecting the situation on the ground so far and its potential impact on the future. And 2, we also asked our panelists to consider the effectiveness and impact of using boycotts and sanctions against any targeted country in light of historical examples such as the Iraqi or South African cases, or the current debates on sanctions against Syria and Iran. I'm now going to turn this over to our panelists, and please let me introduce our first speaker, Professor Ilan Pappé, who is Professor of History at the College of Social Sciences and International Studies at the University of Exeter. He is also the director of the university's European Center for Palestine Studies, the co-director of the Exeter Center for Ethno-Political Studies, as well as political activist. He's the author of many academic works, including The Forgotten Palestinians, A History of the Palestinian Minority in Israel, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, and the Modern Middle East, among many others. Professor.
Thank you. From here, from there?
There's the mic right here.
The mic is there, okay. All right. First of all, I want to thank the Society for organizing this important event, especially Shari, who I know took some pain in bringing me over. If you'll be ever committed to the BDS, we definitely need someone with your stamina and steadfastness in completing the project of carrying out this very nice panel. Secondly, let me just preface within the very short intervention that all of us have and say that I don't really believe that you can totally differentiate between the ethical questions and the efficiency questions. And I'm not doing it for anything I do in life, so definitely I'm not going to do it for the question of the BDS, which for me is both emotional, ideological, and also practical. So I do agree that there is a practical issue here, but I don't think one can separate or divorce the practical issue from the ethical issues. Especially for me, an Israeli, who cares about the people who live there, and who has devoted and still devotes his life to try and help to change the situation in support of the Palestinian people and the Palestinian cause. And in this respect, at least I can begin answering the question by saying that anybody who has been active for the cause of Palestine in England knows that the major avenue for both displaying your support for the Palestine cause and protesting against the oppressive policies on the ground and in making a difference is the BDS option. Whether one likes it or not, one has to admit that there is no other possible way today for any person in this country who wants to show solidarity with the oppressed people of Palestine than the BDS. Of course, there are ways of writing articles, you join protests, and you can do other things. But the BDS has successfully replaced the paradigm of 10 or 15 years ago where activists thought that their role in life was to support the dialogue for peace, or what we used to call the kissing cousin industry. This paradigm has lost, and I will come back to it in a moment. And this paradigm was analyzed as, in fact, helping the Israelis to continue the occupation and pursuing it under the umbrella of either the official peace process or the sort of civil society peace process. And I think one of the great success of the BDS is to be a paradigm that works on the ground. Secondly, I should say that the Israeli responses to the BDS are far more stronger and far more serious than to any other activity for Palestine outside Israel and Palestine than the BDS. The fact that the Israeli government deals with it every now and then, that there is a special ministerial committee to deal with it, the fact that there is a special section in Israeli Mossad dealing with what they call the delegitimization of Israel, shows that whoever thought that the BDS would be able to touch the Israelis in a very sensitive place was right. That it forces the Israelis to explain some of their policies. Whoever thought that this would be the purpose of the BDS is right. That's the only moments and opportunities we have in the last 10 years when either official Israel or semi-official Israel bothers to explain the ethical side of its policies is whenever it is challenged by an ethical campaign. And BDS, more than anything else, is an ethical campaign. It is not a campaign that can bring Israel down. It is not a campaign that can physically dismantle the occupation. But it is a campaign that keeps asking the Israelis, you claim to have a moral high ground. You claim to have a superior position in an area where you are allegedly the only democracy. What the BDS campaign does, it constantly asks the Israelis to answer these questions in earnest and not to hide behind slogans and sound bites. And I think in this respect, the BDS was particularly successful. Again, in this spirit of not dividing ethical issues and practicalities, let me just finish by saying why BDS, who should be the BDS targeting, and how the BDS should be carried out. And I think this would, for me at least, succeed to fuse the two aspects together. Why do people support the BDS? It is very important to see that the BDS as an option, whether when it came as an initiative from the occupied people of Palestine, or whether it came as a project from the solidarity movements for Palestine around the world, came after years of trying to solve the Palestine issue in a different way. For most of the people who are involved in the BDS, the solution before was a dialogue, was a peace process. It is the failure of the peace process, and I would say it's the abuse of the peace process, especially the Oslo process, that was served. I have to finish? Okay, in a minute. That has to the Oslo process that served as an umbrella for the occupation that led people to support pressure from the outside. Who should be, very briefly, who should be boycotted? Especially those who claim not to be culprits. It's easy to see that the Israeli army is part of the occupation. It's easy to see that the politicians are part of the oppression. It is not easy to see how involved are the academics. And I think what the BDS did, it showed us how the Israeli academia is involved directly and indirectly in both maintaining the occupation and the oppression and in justifying it. How to do it? I think the idea that, or the guidelines of the BDS are still valid to differentiate between institutional to personal boycott is a very active dialogue with the Israelis that, believe me, it's the only thing after the suicide bombs, which I did not support, it's the only thing in the last 10 years that forces the Israelis as a government and as a society and as people to ask themselves what's wrong with what we are doing to the Palestinians. And if I'm right that this is what the BDS is doing, it should be supported, enhanced, and encouraged. Thank you.
Thank you very much.